Welcome to the Leadership Passport podcast, where we dive into the journeys, challenges, and insights of school and education leaders from around the world. And I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Mr. Devin Carberry. Devin is the Director of Learning and Innovation and a founding member of Learnlife. Since 2001, he's been an innovative learning advocate. Devin has worked as a classroom teacher and teacher trainer, served on public policy task forces, run after-school programs, led young men's support circles, fostered the growth of 2 new public schools, and written for education publications. Along the way, he's worked in schools with a variety of progressive pedagogies, from multiple intelligences to expeditionary learning. His teaching has been featured in Science Magazine and National Public Radio, and he served on the Arizona Statewide Task Force on Education. He's the author of The Future Will Not Be Taught, and has written for Rethinking Schools magazine and authored a chapter for the book Unleashing the Power of Learner Agency. Welcome, Devin.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So you shared with me an interesting fact about the you floating down the Mississippi River one time. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So after university, I took a year to hitchhike and hop freight trains across the United States. Having been in quite the progressive bubble, I wanted more contact with what the rest of America was like. And so along the way, I came across this group called the Miss Rockaway Armada, which was a group of punk rock artists who had created a 100-foot-long raft out of found junk materials and created this kind of beautiful sculpture of a raft and floated from Minnesota all the way down the Mississippi.
Amazing. So to start things off, if your leadership style was a song or a movie, what would it be and why?
Song or a movie? Man, what's the is it Wanderlust, the one with Paul Rudd and Jennifer Aniston? I think it's a kind of a pokes fun at intentional communities. But I think the vibe is similar of a space where people come together and there's not any leadership isn't formalized in this kind of intentional community, but people are gathered there to for self-leadership and to support the community and putting the kind of community at the center and everybody figuring out what's the best way they can contribute.
Fantastic. So I wonder if we can spend a few minutes talking about your leadership journey and what inspired you to work in this education space and lead the kind of innovative programs that you do.
Well, I mean, for me, those are two kind of very different questions. The why education, I think it just comes from a traumatic schooling experience and wanting to transform that. The environment I came from, which is not atypical from schooling in the 80s and 90s, it felt psychologically and physically unsafe to be at school. I felt constantly bored, and just like creativity was seeping out of my body. I didn't feel listened to. I didn't feel like I mattered to a lot of the adults in my life. And just felt like I had to sacrifice authenticity for acceptance. And so those are things I hope that no one ever feels at Learnlife, to try to create a space where I've transformed that. And I mean, thankfully, our one of the things that our parents report is their kids for the first time almost ever come home super happy and engaged and like they're just beaming to come the next day. And so I think we've created a really safe space here where kids feel engaged and creative and happy. And so, yeah, that's what keeps me coming back, is knowing that they don't have to repeat the experience that I had. In terms of leadership, though, I took a different pathway than most. I think a lot of my leadership style comes from being involved in punk rock and kind of activist organizing in that space of these kind of self-organizing, collective, non-hierarchical spaces where we didn't believe in power over, but power with. And so kind of eschewing this toxic patriarchal model of leadership of, strategy, which means it really is just read as conquest and scalability, which is just unsustainable growth and all these kind of things that are buzzwords within leadership. I think it was more about how do we find spaces with each other to connect and to be intuitive and to decide what we want to do together in a way that isn't trying to exercise power over someone else.
Mm. And can you identify a defining moment in your leadership journey over the years?
Defining moment. I just have had really great mentors, I think has been a big part of it. And so having to be able to watch good leadership in action has been really important. And I've really intentionally sought that out to figure out, to find people who I thought were like, oh, this is the kind of leader that I would like to be. And to seek out their mentorship. But like I said, I think a lot of it has been working and trying to seek out in my professional life too spaces where it didn't feel like I was in top-down organizations, but places where leadership was shared and being able to grow together and learn to build a trust in that as a model of leadership. Was having to live it myself.
And I know maybe Learnlife is starting to have more of a sort of a global presence and kind of outreach and spreading more about, what it does and how it does it. Has there been any particular aha moments for you in terms of your work across different cultures and approaches to education in different cultural contexts?
Um, Yeah, I think the thing that becomes really clear is the biggest blocker to implementing learning innovation, to changing from the kind of traditional system of coercion and control to one that empowers learners and really puts them in the center, and not just in a kind of cliche student-centered way, which I think I very rarely see when people call themselves student-centered, that they're actually thinking about students and putting them in the center as people who have a voice and have agency. And I find the biggest blocker is fear. People don't know how to do it. They don't know how to surrender control. They haven't done it themselves. They haven't experienced it. Yeah, it's so the work that we try to do a lot is to help them accompany that fear, to at least recognize it, because I think self-awareness is step one, is even acknowledging that it's there. And that's a lot of education spaces don't create a space where you can say, I'm afraid of this thing, right? And then to have people to support you and say, yeah, put their hand up and say, yeah, me too, right? Like, I also am struggling with this, and yeah, I don't know, I've never done this. What's it going to look like? I don't have training to do this. I wonder about this scenario and this scenario and this scenario. And so, yeah, one of the things I often ask is, if your school had to give up all the mechanisms of coercion and control tomorrow, what do you think your school day would be like? And you can see the panic in their eyes, and I know they're just imagining like Lord of the Flies scenarios where the kids are hanging from the rafters and burning the school to the ground. But it's funny that there's plenty of evidence that quite the contrary happens when you give learners that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, you talk about that fear is because they can't imagine what it can look like, and so they imagine a worst case scenario, and that's where I really like what you guys have done in sort of opening your doors and having, I forget what you call them, but your open days for educators from around the world, and we've sent a couple of people there from Kuwait, and they come back, so to try and overcome that fear and say, well, here's a school, it's not theoretical, like the things that you're concerned about, maybe they don't have it 100% right, they haven't nailed it yet, but they're doing some tremendous things, and this is how they approach that challenge X, Y, and Z in these different ways. And for them to be able to see it and experience it is very eye-opening for them.
It's one of my favorite things. Well, we have the event you're referring to is called Inspire, and so yeah, it's an intensive 2 days with us. But we also do these deep dives where people will come for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and really immerse themselves. Because I think what happens is people will see the front end of like, wow, it's happening this way. Like, you can actually do this, and then they go back to their site and they're like, wait, but how do they do it? What's the infrastructure? What's the back end design stuff? And so the deep dives are really cool, and I love bringing groups through so they can see like it's not magic. There's definitely a secret sauce. You can just kind of, these are the steps to set it up so that it happens in this way. And there's still obviously a lot of self work that one needs to do to be able to kind of unlearn the kind of control based approach. But yeah, it's really it's a beautiful moment to see. I think this is largely what the world needs right now. Is we need more lighthouses. We need more ways to do it differently. I think by and large, the global dialogue around education is that education is in crisis worldwide. And so rather than just talking about how bad it is, I'd rather just see more and more examples of how you can do it really well. And that's not just with education, but with kind of regenerative agriculture and everything else under the sun that is saying like, okay, let's stop criticizing. Let's start building the thing that's the opposite so that we can actually live towards that instead of just lamenting how bad things are.
Yeah, 100%. So if we talk a little bit now about maybe some of the realities of leadership and the day-to-day, what's been one of the toughest leadership challenges you've faced, and how did you navigate it?
I think it's accompanying people in the unlearning process. I think what happens is we get a lot of people who theoretically are on board with what we do, but then when confronted with not being in control, and like a lot of our learning guides, especially ones who have been in classrooms for a while, they don't know what to do if a learner is not doing what they want them to do, and they don't have any punitive tools, right? They can't give them detention. They can't suspend them. They have to figure out a different way. And we train them in a collaborative solution finding model where they can talk to the learner and empathize with them. Like, hey, so why aren't you engaging? And also even just getting them to think about, like, does the learner have to engage in the thing that you're presenting them? Like, is there another thing that they could be learning that's equally as valid? Maybe they're not ready for this. How do we not just assert that we think this needs to happen in this way right now? And so um, I think accompanying the learning guides in that process of unlearning and saying it's okay, right? To know that, like, everybody's coming in and out. You shouldn't feel bad or ashamed if you're defaulting to your training, right? That your initial training. But then how do we help them move towards something different? Is always a really beautiful challenge, which I love accompanying people in that process.
Yeah, great. Has there been one mistake that comes to mind that's shaped your leadership approach over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially, I don't know how much of it is a mistake, but it's one thing that we didn't get right in the beginning is we often we started with hiring with seeing a need and hiring for that need, and then trying to oblige the person who we hired to stay in that role because we needed it, even if we knew they weren't a fit for that, right? And so one of the things we do a lot more, and we examine every year, is everybody in the right role? Regardless of what you got brought on for, do we need to move? Do we need to shuffle the deck in some way? And so, like, we had someone, for example, who I don't think they'll mind me sharing this, but we hired on as a to support our learners with executive functioning challenges, and to be able to create a program specifically for how do we boost their learning to learn skills to help them with autonomous learning. And this person was neurodiverse themselves and seemed like the perfect candidate, related really well to the kids, understood their challenges, but then in the time to implement the program just was really struggling to get off the ground. And it was like, well, do we keep this person or what do we do? And then it was quite obvious that they were gravitating always towards maker related activities, really creative things. And then we put them in charge of being the studio manager, and, like, it just shined, just absolutely came to life, was able to do things so well. And yeah, it just became obvious that that was that person's sweet spot. And we do that with everybody on the teams to think, like, are you really where you need to be? Rather than, and even with leadership, I think it's important to understand that we're not all going to be good at everything, right? I feel bad for heads of school who have this pressure of, you need to be this unicorn that magically can do all of the, I'm great with people, I'm great with the finance, I'm great with the operations, I'm great with all these things. And it's really the biggest propaganda for a distributed leadership model is just being able to relax and know that you can just do the things you're good at, and then other people will do the stuff that you're not good at, and that's okay. There's no shame in that, right? Because I judged myself a lot in the beginning as a young leader to be like, I should be able to do all of this really well, and I couldn't. I'm just, like, really bad, Kevin, at spreadsheets and finance stuff. It's just like, I can do it, but it's, like, painful, and I'm constantly asking questions. And it's just nice to know that I can say, why do I have to do this? Why don't I find someone who is willing and excited to do it instead of me?
And I guess partly what you're talking a little bit about there is imposter syndrome. You kind of have that
Yeah.
self doubt sometimes and think, well, actually, I don't have any clue what I'm doing. And, quite often that narrative in your head's false a lot of the times. How do you kind of deal with that? I imagine there's been times perhaps where you've wondered, you're doing something new and innovative and different, and you've wondered, maybe, are we on the right track here? Is this what we should be doing?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a yeah. Trust is a tough one. And I think that's the thing I see happen the most is, like, we want to trust in the learners, and then there's this moment where we go so far and then we panic and we're like, but are they going to turn out okay? Or what are the parents going to think? Is the state going to intervene? Is there, and we go to this moment, and it's like, I think we have a space every Friday during our professional development called Real Talk, where it's like we're able to just talk about what's real in our lives, and that's a space where we surface these kind of things, like, hey, I'm kind of panicking at the moment. Like, I just feel like it's a little bit more chaotic than I had imagined what's going on. The learning's really messy, and I'm struggling to know that that's still valid. But I'm yeah, I'm not handling that well, and so I think it's how do we get to a place where we trust the kids, where we trust ourselves, where we trust others that it's going to be okay. It's probably the thing I grapple with the most.
Mm, mm. Is there a leadership practice or habit that's changed the game for you?
I think just to go a little bit deeper into how we do distributed leadership, the expectation is that everybody on the team is a leader in some way, and that we try to avoid, well, we have some kind of outward facing formal leadership roles. We try to avoid saying that, you need a title to be able to do this, but like I said, we really figure out what are people's sweet spots and give them a clearly defined playpen of like, hey, you have decision-making power and autonomy over this. And we try to remove as many layers of bureaucracy as possible to just say, just make decisions. Like, you don't need to, by committee, go to get everybody's consent. We do ask that you go and get advice from everybody who will be impacted, who's an impacted stakeholder, and that you take that into consideration rather than just kind of the wild gun slinging, let's just take decisions and see what happens. But once you've done that, to be able to go ahead and make a decision, whether that has budgetary implications or other people will be involved. But what we see is people are, this is how we become an innovation hub, is that the learning team, because they feel empowered and they know that they can make decisions, they're constantly launching all kinds of new initiatives, whether that be a learner-led council, whether that be open path learning for us came out of that. There's all these things that are new and exciting that have come out of that, which, isn't in anybody's job description. It just happens to be that they're passionate and they want to do it, and they've found enough other passionate people to get it off the ground.
Yeah, amazing. So if we sort of cast our minds to the future now, how do you see international education or even education and schooling in general evolving over the next decade? Hoping it's evolving, I guess.
Hoping it's evolving. It seems really trite, but I just hope we have more positive relationships with each other and with the kids. You can feel it when you walk into a school immediately what the vibe is like. You can feel if there's positive relationships in the building, or if there's antagonism between the teachers and the administration, between the teachers and the parents, between the teachers and the learners, amongst the learners themselves. And so um, I would hope that we would put relationships in the middle and build from there. Because once we build trust, when we build understanding and empathy, we can do a lot together. But if there's distrust, if there isn't collaboration and inclusion, we're not going to be able to pull ourselves out of the education crisis, I don't think.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to an aspiring school leader?
Yikes. I typically don't work with advice. But one thing I might try to bring their attention to is I think oftentimes we get too stuck in the coconut and don't tap into our intuition and sense what's really happening within a system. Every learning community is an ecosystem, a human ecosystem to itself, right? And every ecosystem has ways, emergent things that are growing out of that system and that need to change or to move. And when we just stay in this logical, analytical brain, we often aren't able to sense fully kind of what is emergent. Because we might have our 5-year plan and say, this is the direction we're going in, but it's obvious that everything else is moving in a different direction. And I would say to listen, to sense, to check in with yourself and be like, is this really feeling like what needs to happen? One methodology I like for that is called social presencing. It's a methodology that comes out of MIT, which is somewhat similar to theater of the oppressed or family constellations, but it's trying to figure out, can you get people to represent the stakeholders in the system and see what wants to emerge from those stakeholders, what is the system is asking should happen there.
Great. So look, a couple of quick questions to wrap things up. Your favorite book on life or leadership?
The Tao Te Ching, I think, is the one I constantly come back to. I have it's like a really strong English translation. It's just these little poems about the Tao and what does it mean to go with the flow. And it talks a lot about leadership, about strong leaders are ones who are almost invisible. Strong leaders are ones that don't try to force their will on people, but that bring out the best in these kind of things. And so, every other day, pull it out and just read one of the poems and get some inspiration and a reminder, especially as I'm, like we were talking about, struggling with the trust of like, are we doing the right thing? Am I letting go enough to go with the flow and getting over that fear? I constantly pull that out.
Amazing. One thing you do daily that helps you to lead better?
Walk the floor. You can see I'm like in our music studio because we don't have offices as administrators or as formal leaders within the organization, which I love. It can be quite annoying at times when you need a quiet space for a podcast, for example, and I have to kick most of the kids out. You can see on this side of the music studio, they're being very patient and practicing over there instead of being on the editing side. But I think for me, a good leader, and I learned this from my mentor, Stephen Harris, as I would visit him at Northern Beaches Christian School in Sydney. He would put down his laptop and his phone at the beginning of the morning and just kind of disappear into the school for the rest of the day. And it drive people nuts because they always wanted him to be, answering emails, and he'd just be out actually in the learning communities, talking to kids, talking to everybody, feeling what's going on, resolving conflicts, making suggestions. And that's what I try to do when I'm here within the busyness of a day, is to just always be, even if I'm working on sending emails, I'm doing that within one of our learning spaces, watching learning happening and keeping an eye and an ear on that while I'm doing my own stuff. And I think that's what helps me feel connected and like I know, how to provide adequate support. Because I always felt bad when I worked in schools where someone would come in and say, "We got to do this now." I was like, "You haven't ever been in my classroom. You have no idea what's going on. Like, why would I take your advice if you really don't have your finger on the pulse of what's going on here?"
Yeah. Yeah. A leader, past or present, you admire?
There's so many. I think my mentor in university was the president of the University of Prescott College, Dan Garvey. And he was an epic storyteller, but also amazing at bringing community together. He got the university to, I think it was every week or every fortnight. He would bring everybody together. He would provide lunch, and we would sit down and talk about whatever were community issues. Given this was a small liberal arts college, so we could do this but it was amazing. There was just always a space to come together, and it always felt like there was a can-do. We're in this together. We'll solve any problem, and even if you're annoyed with the university and how it's operating, that's okay. Let's do it together. He's been a constant inspiration to me.
Very good. And finally, best advice you've ever received?
This is coming a little bit back to the the Taoism, but when someone pushes, pull. When someone pulls, push. And I see this all the time where we come into a situation thinking this is how it should be and having expectations, and the situation there's resistance, and the situation is pushing back, and rather than pulling and say, okay, let's go with this and move this energy over to this place, we resist. And that's where I think suffering comes from, pain in general, rather than being more clever and saying, hey, if the learner doesn't want to learn this thing, pull on what he does want to learn on.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a spot on place to leave things right there. So thank you so much, Devin, for your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been great chatting with you.
Absolutely. Same to you, Kevin.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, etc. Drop a comment below to let me know anything you'd like covered in upcoming episodes or suggestions for future guests. You can also connect with me on Instagram and LinkedIn.